All right, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. We are here. I'm here with Rachel Cook and Ryan Pagella from Love is an Open Door, and we're trying something today. This is the first time I've tried this. Depending on how this goes, so no pressure, Ryan and Rachel. I may do this again and have other people on to get their opinions on these. But what we're going to talk about today is the movies that matter to us, from early movies, ones that we associate with childhood, musicals, even try to name our favorite movie or best movie that we feel. And so we'll see how this goes. Before we do that, real quick, I want to welcome Rachel and Ryan back to being a fan of Disney, the podcast. It's good to have both of you.
Am I in
Thank
my
you.
5 year now? I mean, 5 year, my five episode yet?
This is your fourth one.
Oh,
This is your
This
fourth
is
really?
one. I
my,
I
was
thought I
just
did
I think this
more.
is my third.
And this is Rachel's third one. But guess what, Ryan? Rachel and I are going to be talking about Run Disney next week. So you two are going to be caught up. So
Neck and
um,
neck.
we'll have our five timers, and then I'm planning to have a five timers, um, some type of five timers celebration, where you
Fun.
can have your virtual jackets. So
Yay.
Yeah, that's
so
fun.
first, a little bit of background for people who haven't seen you two before talk or haven't listened to an episode with you two before. Just briefly tell us about your Disney fandom, how you got into it, and where you are today. Go ahead, Rachel.
So I've been a Disney fan since childhood. I went a few times as a kid. I grew up in the Northeast and I moved to Florida in 2010. And I now live in Orlando.
Still there.
Uh and what?
I said still there.
Still there. So far it's getting challenging. But no, I'm still here. And I there's a lot I love about the company and the media that it produces, a lot that I have to criticize. But it all comes from a place of fascination and love and knowing how, despite the fact that it is a big company, like what an impact it has on people and their lives. And I'm particularly a big fan of the parks and the kind of lore and technology and history surrounding that. But there's a lot of movies that I really love as well.
Okay. Thanks, Rachel. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, as some of your listeners probably know, it's like I've been going to Disney parks for a long time. I'm a theme park junkie. I have a YouTube channel dedicated to that. Not as much as I was doing before, but you know what it is. It's like that's just life. Sometimes you can't go as often as you'd like to. But I'm like Rachel. I'm a big fan of the parks. I'm very into sort of the technology that is built into them. I am and the theming. I'm a big theming guy. You know, I grew up in a theater family, so like I really appreciate what Disney does with their parks. But I grew up watching the movies. They were a staple in my household, and there's a period of time where I like was not into Disney in my teens, and then I came back to it in my adulthood when I finally got to go to Disney for the first time. And I wouldn't say it's taken over my life or anything like that, but I think there's like some really interesting storytelling that happens in Disney movies, and particularly for me, it's through Disney villains, which is a very queer coded aspect of Disney. And I'm very fascinated by Disney history, especially in that regard, because there's always been like sort of an undertone of queerness in Disney movies and film, um, that just they still haven't like quite gotten it yet. They get it a couple times here and there, but like I'm a big Disney villains person, so like that is like my way into Disney is like watching the movies, enjoying the parks, loving the villains, and it's been fun doing this show, Love is an Open Door, because like we kind of like just have conversations, but we get to do hyper analysis like I do on my other podcast, The Mutant Ages, which is about the X-Men. And I don't know, I find it very fascinating. Uh, but I think the biggest draw for me is like Disney parks. as Rachel knows, because they're always doing cool stuff. They're always upgrading, and like I feel like they're at the forefront of most technology. And Central Florida is one of the hubs for technology, which a lot of people don't actually know. Um, and it's just a really interesting aspect of Disney, and I love it. Like it makes you feel good at the end of the day, right, Rachel? Like watching old Disney movies brings you back to a kid. So if you're having a bad day, you can turn on an old Disney movie and relive your childhood a little bit again.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Um, y- you know what? Like when you two were talking about Disney movies, like I'm a huge Parks fan as well. I'm a big Disney movies fan. However, when I was making my list, a lot of the for so everybody knows we came up with I originally came up with 11 questions. I sent it to Ryan and Rachel. Um, we talked about a few of them, we combined a couple, and then we added one. So and what I originally said, we probably need to cut this down to 7 or 8. We ended up adding one. So we have 12 questions. And then we decided to do Disney and non-Disney. You don't have to, but if there's some of these categories where somebody has a Disney movie and a non-Disney movie that they're thinking of, they can say it. For
Oh,
a lot of the
I did
Disney
one of each.
movies,
So yeah,
what, Ryan?
I did one of each because I was kind of like I liked looking at the comparison of like the Disney versus the non-Disney, and I thought that was super interesting. So,
Well,
but I over
what
prepare. So
for my Disney movies, there are a lot of acquired movies.
yeah.
And it made me think of it when Rachel said, despite Disney being a big company, like it's fascinating. And there a lot of the movies that I have on here that I have like for, you know, noted as Disney movies, they're actually the acquired movies. Not that I don't enjoy the Disney movies, but I always am stuck with the story of when Bob Iger first joined the company or first became CEO, the Pixar brand was so much more trusted as kind of a family brand than the Disney brand was. And so I remember seeing some of those first movies that came out, and like I think we all kind of experienced the end of the movies before the Renaissance of Disney and then into the Disney Renaissance. So it's really, really interesting. But so before we get into our 12 movie specific questions, I did have two questions for each of you. And we can start with Rachel, you appear first on my screen, so we can go that way.
Okay.
And then Ryan. So the first question is, what do you think makes a good or great movie? What does it have to do, or what should it have in it?
I think I think it's really, really iffy to assign any like hard and fast rules because if you ask me like what's a really great movie, the first movie that comes to mind is Jaws, which is like widely considered to be like this like almost a perfect movie in terms of like characterization and setup and payoff. But it's like but you wouldn't think that like if an alien came down and you explain movies to him and you're like, oh, they're these like moving images that have the like ability to like tell stories and have a profound effect on the audience and tell you could do anything, you could say any, you can make any story with a movie. You'd be like, okay, well, what's like this like one of the most famous movies, what's it about? It's about a shark that eats people. So I and like to compare it to like another movie that like people love, like you could compare it to Snow White, you could compare it to Lord of the Rings. So that's like it's a really hard question to answer, and I think like the only universal truth to a movie that makes it good or great is that can it evoke a response in the viewer that makes them feel something, like some pull to it, like something that makes them want to go back to it again and again, something that makes them want to keep talking about it again and again. So like, and I'm not talking about like a movie that's going to just do shock value. I'm talking about something that like makes you go to people and be like, you have to see this, and it could be for like any number of reasons.
Okay. All right, Ryan, what makes a great or good movie to you?
I agree a lot with what Rachel was saying in terms of you want to be able to revisit it, and be able to tell other people about it. So like it's successful in that way. When I turn to people and say like, "Oh, that was a good movie," there's a lot of standards that it has to meet for me, and a lot of that has to do with production value and being tight. And I think storytelling is the most important key component of any movie. So like it's got to have a strong script, and the script has to be tight. Like, and it has to do what it needs to do. There are thousands, millions, billions, trillions of movies out there. And I'm a big movie guy. I go to the movies once a week. We have a $5 movie night here where I live, and I always take advantage of it, even if there's nothing I really don't want to see. And something that I'm always looking for is like, okay, can this tell a story? Can it tell a story effectively? Which means it needs good editors. But then from that point up, it's like a whole building process. Then I'm looking at like, okay, is the score good? Or is the acting good? Is the directing good? The sets and all that. So I'm kind of like an obnoxious person to watch movies with, because if you hang out with me at my house and we're like, all right, we're gonna watch this movie, I tend to be talking through it and be like, look at what's going on the set. Oh, can you see that set piece over there and like why these two things are connected? Um, and like that is what's really important to me. It's something that I think is a good example of this is Scream. I think Scream's like the first Scream is like a near perfect movie, which is funny because it's about movies and those tropes. So it's like a really good introduction to the concept of what I'm saying. But it's like it's tight. It tells the story. It keeps you on your feet. It's one of those movies that people are still talking about now, similar to Jaws, because it was just sort of like it was a game changer in the film industry, and something that I also value like profoundly in filmmaking is like practical effects, which there are a lot less of now, and we have too much CG. That's kind of my biggest complaint about MCU movies is that it's like entirely green screen. Um, and it always comes down to just telling an effective story for me. And so like I'm talking about screenplay writing, but I'm also talking about once when you have that, you have to lock in all the other pieces,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is really the whole team. You could say, oh, it's the director that pulled it all together, but I'm like, no, you just need to have like a good story and a strong team, and that produces a good movie. But bad movies are great too. It depends what you're in the mood for, and I think that's something you want to look at when you're trying to decide what is a good movie, because it similar to what Rachel was saying, I think it's going to be different for every single person.
Okay. All right. Next one is what do you
Oh, do you not
like
answer
to
these questions, Cody? Like,
oh, yeah. I mean I agree that is storytelling is very, very important. And my like the way that I look at movies is more kind of what do they give me? Do they give me diversion? Um, where like I can kind of unplug? Do they
like what you're
make me
coming to the
think
movie
of
for, right?
yeah, I mean, do they make me think of things that have happened in the past? Do they make me think of previous movies that I really liked? Like I don't know if either one of you watched the latest Star Wars show on Disney Plus, Skeleton
Not yet.
Crew.
A
Not
few
yet.
episodes.
So I it is in my top, I would say probably two or three Star Wars Disney Plus shows. It is
But now
amazing.
you're moving into like the television
Yeah, I
Hmm.
know.
format, which is very different. And my point being about that is because I know one of these questions on here later is about like emotional responses to movies. And I'm like, one of my things, part of which I think is part of my diagnosis, is that like I can have an emotional response to movies, and but it doesn't it's very rare that I'll cry over a movie, but a TV show has enough time to make me attached to what is going on in that
Hmm.
world. So like those are almost like two different conversations because they're two very different ways to tell a story. Is like you have the long form, multiple seasons, hour long episodes, and then you have like a 2 hour tops movie to tell an entire universe story.
Yeah.
So
Well, what I like, and I agree, but what I was saying about Skeleton Crew, that the reason I brought it up now is because it reminds me a lot of those old Amblin Entertainment movies,
yeah,
like E.T., The Goonies, which I don't think was actually some of those aren't Amblin, but one
Mm-mm.
of those
well,
isn't.
those will be coming up in some of my
But
search today.
And so
So
it's those things that I get out of the movie, I think is kind of what the the most the really interesting things to me. Another thing I find really interesting for like actual makeup of a movie is now people refer to them as Easter eggs or just kind of the the technical aspects in a movie that like if you are going to a Disney park and you just want to enjoy the park, you can just walk around and but if you want to do a deeper dive, you can do a deeper dive and you can look at, the different things that are in parks and the different details. I like that about movies as well. I remember getting teased in college when the new, I think it might have just been called O, but it was based on Othello, came out. And it was kind of like a modern day
oh
retelling of
right.
Othello. And I remember getting teased because there's a whole bunch of symbolism in there. Obviously the letter O or the shape of an O shows up a lot of times during the movie. And I remember talking about that at the beginning and before it started. And so then like anytime a circle would show up on the screen, like someone would tease me about like, oh, there it is, look. But it might just be like some random thing that I'm pretty sure they didn't mean to actually use as symbolism. But there's that as well. Um, the second question was, what do you like or what do you think you should get out of a movie? So when you're watching and it makes it a great movie, if you can get what out of it? And do you want to start again, Rachel?
Sure. Yeah, like that's if I it's usually characters, I would say, that have to stick with me. Like people who and I guess this also really especially applies to like longer form content, like if it's a series or if it's a TV show. But like it's people, it's like concepts and characters that I would want to come back to, and performances that really grip me. I think that is what uh like I like to the most to get out of movies, or like characters that I'm interested in instead of characters who I'm like, I don't really care what happens to you. I don't care about your story. I don't know who you are. So and that can come through in like the script, it can come through in the performances, it can come through in a lot of different ways.
Okay. All right. Ryan, how about you?
It kind of goes, it's funny. It's like kind of is the same answer that I had for the first question, where like I just really need a strong script. And I just like the writer in me needs that. And like the characterization is good too. I mean, obviously, like you want to be able to tell a story, but I mean, like that's what movies are. It's telling a different kind of story. You could read a book, you read a comic, you could watch a movie, you could watch a TV show. And when I go to a movie, I want to be able to sit down afterwards to be like, wow, I'm still thinking about what I just consumed. And yeah, maybe it's visually appealing and that always is helpful too. But like, I think these are questions that we can sort of dive a little bit more into when we answer that, or sorry, answers that we can dive a little bit more into when you ask the questions per types of movies that we have answers for. That was a really, really clunky way to say what I was trying to say. But yeah, like if something stand out to me, what I'm gonna remember is like what what was that story and why it affected me in the way that it did, and why I want to like tell other people to go see that movie. um and like figure out, like, so I'll use for example, this is going to be a really this is this is a really out there, but Smile 2 I think is a great film, which is a sequel to the horror movie Smile, about the monster that follows people around for like a week until it consumes them. um and what I thought Smile 2 was really like interesting about that movie is that it really explored how sort of toxic and horrible the pop culture world actually is if you're a pop star, even though that's not what the movie's about. The movie's about a monster, but the storytelling that was weaved into that to symbolize like how dark working in that industry can be, I thought was like just a really interesting story. And so now I have to tell people, I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like it's it's not just a movie about a monster. It's a movie that is also explaining like what it's like to work in this culture and why it might be bad. And like I find that like you wouldn't get that from watching a
Mhm.
trailer, which I think trailers are kind of stupid these days. They're not very good at selling what a movie is. Um, but like that's what I'm looking for. I want to be able to convince somebody to go because there's something actually interesting happening with the story here that's beyond the surface level.
I have a whole theory for why trailers suck. It's because the guy who used to do the announcements died. So they no longer
Oh yeah,
just
because you don't hear your
state,
So
voice
right. They
anymore.
no longer just state what happens in the plot. It's now they have to like they couldn't find a guy as good as that, so they just piece together like moments
They
and
never find like
try
another
to
guy
just
that sounds like Mr.
give an
Movie
idea of the
Phone.
vibe of the movie rather than what actually happens in the movie. That's
I
my we
actually
don't have to dive into it, but that's my theory.
I was going to ask like the narrator needs to come back.
Yeah.
And it did, like when I think about great trailers or trailers that got me excited to go, it was trailers with the narrator. And I remember as a kid, actually, my younger cousin and I, we would, or all of our cousins, we would put on like shows and skits and everything. And typically before we did that, like we always thought we needed some type of trailer. And so we would like, speak in our deepest voice that we could and try to like get like be the narrator of the trailer. That is interesting. Like, no, what you two are saying that there maybe we need to bring back the trailer uh,
The
announcer.
Mr.
And
Movie
that's
Phone
another thing
voice,
about that
right?
show. One of that show, The Skeleton Crew, it kind of goes back to a lot of these like 80s movies.
Hmm.
So it actually does have a right, it actually does have an announcer in the trailer, which is
Oh
pretty
wow,
cool.
I should go watch that
Um,
the
to
trailer.
get
I
you
think
I can't remember, it was one of the early trailers, but it like there's a guy saying like, do you want an exciting life or leave your boring life behind?
right.
Join these, uh
Yeah.
on this epic adventure.
That's funny because
Um,
That Mr. Movie Phone voice is kind of like going back to what I was just talking about. I'm like, instead of me telling you to see this movie because this is what this movie is about, somebody is literally telling
yeah.
you and spelling it out for you and be like, you want to see these movies for these reasons. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and we have our 12 movies will start at the top. And so if everybody listening or watching knows, everybody like we kind of talked about these topics, but still these topics are open for interpretation for people. So it doesn't have to like I won't explain too much about the topic because everybody can interpret it a little bit differently. And anybody who's watched or listened to me before knows like when we do these votes or we do the votes for like best Disney movie and Pixar movie and MCU in class, I always leave the definition of best or favorite up to the students. So in that kind of vein, we'll do this. So the first question is either the first movie you remember seeing or an early movie you remember seeing. Um, it doesn't because it would be really difficult to have a first memory of a first movie, I know. But a first or early movie that you saw, Disney and non-Disney. Another thing I should add is if you have a couple that you couldn't decide on, if you could say them both quickly because I do
Um,
that a few times. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Rachel.
so one of the earliest movies I remember seeing in theaters was Aladdin. I know there were a lot of movies I saw when I was a kid, but that was a movie I remember. I distinctly remember because I saw it several times in the theaters. But the first time we were late, and we walked in on the Prince Ahmed scene where he like almost tramples Aladdin in the street. And I remember being very confused.
Ahmed.
Ahmed. Um, so that's the one of the first movies I remember like movies like I watched a lot of kid shows like I my when I asked my parents like what was like movies you remember watching as a kid and they didn't name movies, they both named like TV shows that I watched that were for like preschoolers.
Yeah, that
um
makes sense.
but that was like one of the first movies I remember watching and like getting the VHS for it and just like watching it over and over again.
Okay.
I always
right?
figured you're a little bit younger, so I was like, oh yeah. So like that makes sense though. I thought you were gonna have the
Yeah.
same answer as me, but then I was like,
So
no, I don't think.
what was Aladdin like 92? So I would have been like
Yeah,
4. And that's like
yeah,
I think 4 is like about an age when you start to really like have the
yeah,
attention span to
Yeah.
watch a whole movie.
yeah. We'll talk about it later, but one of the movies that I know you're gonna bring up later is also my sister's wheelhouse, and it's because you guys would have been in school together at the same time. You know what I
Okay.
mean? Like you and
Yeah.
I wouldn't have, but you and her would have. So,
Okay.
but we'll get there.
Cool. I'm excited.
So what about go ahead, Ryan. Your first or early movie?
So I have two written down because I did one for Disney, non-Disney each. But the one that I have for Disney written down, and this cannot be the first movie that I saw in theaters or even like saw period, is Little Mermaid, which was what 1989. And I was like, I would have been like 5 or 6 then. So like, there's definitely other stuff, and I was like, all right, well, I know that I remember being a kid and also seeing like Mary Poppins, 101 Dalmatians, and Bambi a lot, but like
Yeah.
they just that didn't stick with me like Little Mermaid did. And similar to Rachel's story, is that my sister, my older sister, I have two sisters. The older one took me to see Little Mermaid, and we were late to that as well. And I think it's just like somebody trying to get their kid into the freaking theater is really what's going on there. um, but I remember seeing that a couple times, and I remember loving it so much that my sister, who knew people who worked at the movie theater, got them to give me the poster that they had there once
Oh.
when the movie was out of theaters. So that was like a super cool memory I have. But I think the oldest movie I have a memory of is non-Disney, and that is E.T., which again goes back to the Amblin films that you were talking about. And also why I'm obsessed with the ET ride and ET things, because, I remember having a conversation, I don't know, like 6, 7 years ago with a couple friends that went and watched the ET, and they're like, they hadn't seen it or grown up with it. And they were like, why would even anybody like this movie? And I was like, you don't understand. E.T. was like the entire 80s.
Mhm.
It was like
It
a
made so
phenomenon
much
that
money.
has been completely forgotten about. And also, I don't know why my family kept on making me watch ET and why it was on everywhere. Because, like, literally any holiday, ET was on the TV. It would be like on television. And it is a terrifying movie. And here
So
I am now, an adult who loves horror movies and aliens. So, like,
I I I think it's important when we talk about Disney movies that like when Ryan and I were kids, because I don't know, like I know your students are a lot younger than us. We are old millennials. Um, it's important to remember that the idea that like of Disney Plus and the idea that you can just access Disney
mhm.
movies like whenever
right.
you want
Yep.
is a really, really new concept. And when we were kids, like you could see it in the theaters, and if you were lucky, you could get it on VHS when it came out. But A, it was usually really expensive. And B, it was only available for a short time. Like they like that was
Yeah.
like Disney's
Mhm.
whole business strategy with their movies is
For
they own,
years,
yeah, for
decades.
decades. It's insane. That's like a whole other conversation, but that's why like I like we didn't have the ability to just watch whatever
Yeah.
movie necessarily that we wanted. We had to either own it, get lucky enough to see it in theaters, or catch it if it happened to be on TV and we happened to have a channel that could watch it.
Well, and here's one more thing I'll throw into to what you were just saying, Rachel. I think back in what 2023 when they started doing the retrenchment and taking a lot of shows off, and they did a lot of Disney Plus originals they took off of
Yeah.
Disney Plus. The agreement for that I is they had to take them off the service to be able to claim them kind of as tax breaks or whatever.
Mm,
But I'm not sure if they have to leave them off forever because some of those shows are being sold, like you can buy them like on Apple and
yeah,
Amazon and
you
things like
can get
that.
them in other places.
I I wonder if they are going to bring some of those back. And so I wonder if like there still is like, the Disney Vault as we knew it, where they would put something out, take it for a few months, put it in the vault,
Yeah.
and then release it every like 5 or 7 years or something like that. I wonder if they are kind of still working with some of that on Disney Plus because there's still a lot of shows that
Yeah.
movies that haven't been on Disney Plus or they'll be on there. briefly and then they'll be taken down. And so I kind of wonder if they're still like trying to do that for to a certain extent.
I think it
Maybe it
might
doesn't feel
be.
quite as purposeful or as
Yeah.
successful,
Well, okay,
but
but think
maybe.
about this though. Not to interrupt, Rachel, but what happened to the Willow show that was on there for like 2 months and now it's completely inaccessible? Same with Runaways, another show
Hmm.
that I really enjoy. And if you think back to our childhood, I'm like, there's so many shows that was like on the Disney Channel that I
Hmm.
would love for them to put on there so I could just rewatch them again. Some of them are like really silly, like Dumbo's Circus, which was like the live action. There was a live action Winnie the Pooh show
Hmm.
that was like
I
big
had, yeah,
mascot costumes.
yeah.
The Jungle Book cartoon, like a lot of this, like it's just, and it never got released on DVD. And I'm like, well, Disney has it somewhere digitally. There's no
Yeah.
way that they don't. I also think this is gonna sound kind of bad, but I actually do think that Song of the South should be something that is digitally reachable. Not because we want to like promote racism, but because we have all these other racist Disney cartoons that are available. I'm like, no, we need to use this as like a point of like a learning lesson and part of Disney's history and like things not to do with that same caption at the beginning. So I just think there's a lot of stuff that is in the vault that we may never see them take out just because they don't want to, because I don't understand fully how streaming works and like what the cost of that actually is to do that. But there does seem to be some kind of component there where like there's some shows that are just completely lost to time, except for the people who have taken time to digitally release them on YouTube.
So
And it's
I
Disney,
actually
so they'll probably like, you
Yeah.
can't put this on YouTube. So
when well, I actually remember seeing Song of the South in the theaters on its last re-release, and
right, I was gonna say,
I think it
didn't
was
they re-release it
86
in like
maybe.
the 80s, like the early 80s, something like that?
I think they released it in 86 before they released it when I guess maybe 88 'cause they released it before Splash Mountain opened because
Right.
they released it so they could build interest around the attraction. So I do remember seeing that. The movies I had written down, interestingly, I because as I said, I cheated, which is fine. You could do
What do you mean you
that.
cheated?
Um, I wrote down for my first or early movies, I wrote down three Disney movies and one non-Disney movie. The non-Disney movie, Ryan, is E.T. I remember seeing that. I still eat Reese's Pieces today.
That's the reason why
Like
I also,
it,
that is like where that is one of those things that got me into marketing initially, was understanding that you could do product placement in
yeah,
movies. And ET is always my example go to for that, because that story is crazy. It was supposed to be M&M's and it wasn't, because like M&M or Hershey was ever like,
yep,
they were like, oh, it's never going to be successful enough. So then Reese's Pieces got in there, and that is why Reese's Pieces is even as popular as it is
yeah.
now as a product that you can buy. So
It's one of the oldest examples to me of that of product placement that
right,
like, oh,
right.
you can do this in movies or you can even do it in TV shows just by
Like
having
that and
something
Coke,
placed.
you know.
You don't have to have like an advertisement, right?
Right, right.
Um, and then the early Disney movies, I did have Little Mermaid and Aladdin. I remember Aladdin. I vividly remember sitting and waiting for in the mechanics like mechanic shop, waiting for our car to be worked on and trying to draw like the genie and trying to draw like the Aladdin logo or like write it out the way it's written. The Little Mermaid, I remember that was such a huge deal. Anytime we would go to like a hotel swimming pool, everybody would try to do like the hair flip thing backwards. Um, but one of the earliest movies I remember seeing in the theaters is The Black Cauldron, which
That's a good
is
one.
it's so interesting. And now that like now being older and knowing some of the history of that movie and how it was made, that it just took so long and it was one of it ran so far, so much over budget. And it's I've watched it recently. And it could actually it could crack the top five of the scariest movies I've watched as well because it's just so weird that like a kid's movie would
I think we should do that next, Rachel,
would do
after
this.
Muppet Treasure Island.
And now a message from Cody's Inner Dialogue. Hey Cody, Yeah, what's up, inner dialogue? Hey, in honor of the movies that matter to us, part one. Okay, inner dialogue. In honor of your discussion with Rachel and Ryan, I thought it'd be fun if you asked me a few of the movies that I like, a few that matter to me. Oh, oh, okay. Um, all right. Well, here, go with this one. What's a movie that makes you cry or is sentimental? Oh, that's Tangled. Tangled, really? Yeah, yeah. I love the story of Tangled. I love how Rapunzel gets out of the tower and she gets away from her keeper, who's trying to keep her there and won't let her see the outside world. Okay, and how she realizes she is the princess, and it just makes me cry, tears of joy. It's so amazing. Oh, okay. What about let's see, an inspirational movie? Hmm. The Princess Bride. The Princess Bride? Yeah, The Princess Bride. It's so inspirational to me. The way that Wesley finds his way back to the princess, it's amazing. I mean, there are so many people, one in particular, who's trying to stop him from finding his way back and finding his true joy in life. But it's just so great. It's so inspirational to me. It really speaks to me. It speaks to you. Yeah, it speaks to me. Let's try one more. Okay, what about a movie that you most relate to? Most relate to? Oh, that'd be Cinderella. Cinderella. Why do you relate to Cinderella? Because I really identify with the fact that Cinderella has to do all the work and she has to clean everything, and her wicked stepmother and her stepsisters, they just take advantage of her all the time and they don't ever listen to her ideas. Okay, inner dialogue. Am I the antagonist in your favorite movies? What do you mean? It kind of sounds like, I mean, am I Mother Gothel and Tangled? Oh, come on, don't be ridiculous. Am I Vizzini in The Princess Bride? Oh, come on, you're not Vizzini. Huh? I mean, if anything, I thought I'd be Inigo Montoya. Whoa, don't we think highly of ourselves? But no, these stories aren't about you. I mean, not everything's about you, Cody. Yeah, I understand that, but this kind of seems like you're talking about me. I mean, you're talking about the wicked stepmother and how you have to do all of the work. That's because I do all the work around here. Okay, inner dialogue. We've got to get back to the show. Thank you, everyone. Speaking of kids movies, the next one is, what movie do you most associate with childhood?
Disney
With
was
wait, with my child, with our childhoods, or with
Yeah,
the
with your
idea of child?
childhood.
Oh,
Most
okay.
yeah,
associated with
Okay.
your childhood.
Okay.
yeah. Disney was tough because like I already listed like Little Mermaid and stuff, and I do think about that with my childhood, and I think about Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Muppet movie. I remember watching the Muppet movie a lot. Like I feel like the Muppet movie was really like what formed a lot of my sense of humor for a very long time. It's still to this day. Like I don't know. Whenever I revisit, I'm like, also talk about a good movie that just is like great start to finish with an incredible soundtrack. But for Disney, this is really funny because I probably would have been like 8 or 9 at the time, but like similar to both you guys, it is Aladdin. I don't know why. I think whenever I watch like Aladdin now as an adult, it's like that whole opening sequence like takes me back. Like, and I remember like watching it, finally getting it on a VHS and putting it on as like it's like hearing the music and the sound. Took me 20 years to understand that that character at the beginning was also the genie. Was not quick at picking that one up. And it's funny because like it's like I don't really have an attachment to Aladdin as an adult. I don't know, like it's just like something that like was
Hmm.
a big part of my childhood. I remember being really obsessed with the genie, and so like I remember that being a thing. I I wanted to write Toy Story down because I was so obsessed with Toy Story, but I keep on looking at the timestamp of when that came out. And I was like, I was really too old to be obsessed with Toy Story. And like, I don't know why that happened. But yeah, Aladdin is kind of like the answer that I have for that one. Um, because I have a lot of memories around that, and like I just had so much merch from Aladdin, which I did not have of the Little Mermaid. I just had like Flounder or whatever. where I had like the genie plush, and I loved the games that came out. Like I think the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis Aladdin games are like famously known as being some of the better Disney games that came out at that time. So, but for non-Disney, this is a more interesting answer: is the 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, which
Hmm.
whenever I watch that, it just brings me back. That is a great comfort movie because like it just I don't know, like I was one of those kids that was really into the cartoon. And so like I remember seeing that movie and be like, whoa, they're real. And then like having dreams about it as a kid and being like, now we can all hang out because they're no longer cartoons. And then like my brain decided to put the cartoon ones in with the live action ones, which was interesting for a while. Um, but yeah, I mean, like I definitely have a like I probably wouldn't be as obsessed with pizza as I am if I didn't like if I didn't obsessively watch that movie as a child. And what is insane is that we did not ever own that movie. Like I kept on watching it on TV or like in the theater or like at friends' houses. So it was just it's kind of like Aladdin and ET where they were just sort of these phenomenons that like took over my life for a while. But I still stand by it. It's a great movie.
It it also, like you mentioned pizza, it also your your love of marketing,
Yeah.
Mhm.
product
Yeah.
placement. I did not think of that. That could have been on my list. Do you remember, because I watched the cartoons, I had like all the action figures. Did you get the action figures from the movie?
I never did. No.
So
Which is
they
interesting.
were,
They're very different look than the regular action figures.
yeah, like, and this is, I vividly remember like the action figures from the cartoon were like they looked plastic, right? Like
Yeah.
they were plastic, they looked plastic. They kind of had that like I goes sheen or glare or whatever on them. The ones from the movie, I guess they were more rubberized. Like they
Yeah.
felt I remember playing with them and thinking like, "Ooh, these are so cool." Like these feel so much cooler than the toys I just had. Um that I didn't write that one down, but I definitely could have.
It's in your answer now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah. I have to grab my charger in a second, but it's like I think about my childhood in like different stages, and definitely like in like early elementary school, like preschool, it would have been a Little Mermaid, the Little Mermaid. That was when I know my mom will tell you I was obsessed with it. I wouldn't have seen it in theaters because I was only a year old when it came out, or if I did see it, I don't remember it. But I had like a ton of Little Mermaid like toys, and I wanted to like have beautiful hair like Ariel, which didn't happen because I didn't grow hair till I was like 4 years old, and then it was very curly. And then thinking about it, like when I was like an adolescent, like maybe like late elementary school to early middle school, which I still consider like childhood, and I in some ways those years were more formative and impactful for me than like my elementary school years were. It's Pocahontas. And Pocahontas is like a movie that I am very uncomfortable with now. Like I see a lot of flaws in it. I probably wouldn't
Beautiful, at
purposely.
least, like
It's
animation
it's
wise.
beautifully animated, but like the story and the characters are very problematic. And I back when I was podcasting with my friend Sam, we did an episode on it. We interviewed these two Native American sisters who are actors about it, and but it really like I can't deny the fact that it had a really huge impact on me. Like it made me very interested in early American history. It made me very interested in like just Native American aesthetic to probably what would now be a pretty cringy degree. But that was like that was a big part of those years for me. Like 9, 10 years old
Mhm.
uh was getting into that, and I can't like pretend that that didn't happen.
The
I don't know if that's
I
bad. I mean, like, it's not to interrupt, but like, I know that it's problematic, but it did get you interested in actual indigenous culture. So
It
it did
did.
manage to do that.
It did, but then I was also like making like plastic dream catchers and stuff
Well,
like that. It's I have to go get my charger really quick, so I'm
Okay.
just gonna
That's fine.
turn off my
Cody
video for a
can
second.
answer while you're doing that.
Okay.
That brings up something that we like. I know you and I have talked about. I think Rachel and I talked about it when she was on with Sam. They kind of those when we think about things that are problematic or cringy now, like you know, that was those movies were a lot of people's first kind of introductions to a lot of things. And so, it's like what uh what seems inappropriate or what seems okay now will probably not seem okay in the next 5 or 10 years,
Yeah.
like, and so is it this constant state of like moving forward and people being introduced to something and then kind of learning more about it. And so, I know we've talked about that before. It just reminded me it's very interesting that like these movies can elicit strong reactions. They can get people introduced to things and then people can go and learn more about it. But also, unfortunately, they are entertainment. They can, kind of like push a lot of these stereotypes and these ideas. The movies most associated with childhood, I had at first written down Aladdin and The Little Mermaid for the reasons I said, but I moved those up to the early movies, so I could say these two. Um, if I talk about my childhood, and I can say they're Disney because now they're acquired properties, it was Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And like I have said often, I feel like Harrison Ford and the music of John Williams kind of like that was my childhood.
Well, I agree with you
Um,
on that. And if you go to like Hollywood studios, I mean that is what that whole theme park
yeah,
is.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like it play that's when they built it, was that time.
yeah. And but non-Disney's The Goonies.
That's a good one.
Because and I always watched it. I always pictured going on an adventure like that. I always thought, how cool would it be to go on an adventure like that? Which is why I mentioned like that's why I am absolutely in love with Skeleton Crew now. I actually just found this new show on Disney Plus today. I don't know what country it's from. It's dubbed in English called Wonder Boys that I might watch because it seems like
I
it's
actually
something
haven't heard of that
similar
one.
to that. But yeah, those were the ones that were associated with childhood. Like my mom will tell me the story like with Star Wars, I would watch it, rewind it, watch it, rewind it. I would watch it 2 or 3 times a day if I had the time. And it would be to the point where like we would be driving into the closest city that had a mall to us was named the name of the city was Humble. And like I would say from the back seat, "Oh, are we in Humble yet?" And mom would say, "We're almost there," or "We're close." And I would say, "That's what Luke said when he was flying into the Dagobah system." Like everything in life, like I could kind of like go back to Star Wars. So that definitely was
I
like
think that's
my
true of like a
childhood.
lot of our
Yeah.
generation specifically. And like I agree. I didn't put Star Wars anywhere on my list, but now you're making me think that maybe I should have. Um no, I mean Goonies also that was like a movie that like really got kids into the idea of treasure hunting. And it,
Hmm.
you know, I don't I there certainly have been a lot of movies since and have tried to do what Goonies did, but like Goonies is still sort of like the peak of that. And how many parodies have come out afterwards about Goonies? Because like I think it just really stuck with us in our childhood. And I don't know, like it's what I agree with you. It's like that's just one of the movies that was like everywhere. It was like
Yeah.
E.T., you know,
Yeah.
like
The did we watched it last couple weeks, maybe last week or a week and a half ago with the boys. This is the first time watching it. And it made me think of like, there are some parts in that movie that they're a little
terrifying.
scary. And
There's
and
like that. Wait, what is that dude? Like the one that looks crazy.
Sloth. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually when we were watching it, my youngest son. is
Are
8.
you sitting there being like, maybe this was a bad move?
Well, well, like in the in the beginning when they're finding like they're in the attic and they're finding the treasure map and
Yeah.
they're playing kind of that like mysterious music. Like he's like, oh, this is kind of scary. And so I at that point just decided I'm like I've got to tell him about sloth because I remember as a kid that being very scary. And then similar to like Frankenstein's monster and similar to Hunchback of Notre Dame, like the real bad people are not he's the good person. He's not the
Right.
real like
Right.
scary
Right.
person.
Right.
Um, and so I did tell them about that, and my youngest son ended up like he loves sloth now. Like if I could find a plush of sloth, like he would want it.
I'm sure it exists or somebody could create it.
Yeah.
Although it makes me wonder, Rachel, are there any movies from your childhood that you showed April that ended up terrifying her by accident?
Not terrifying her, but she hasn't connected with a lot of the movies that I, sorry if you can hear my dog barking.
We can't hear anything.
She thought Nightmare Before, we tried to show her Nightmare Before Christmas, which I'm not a huge stand for Nightmare Before Christmas, but she thought that was a little spooky. She thought like Hocus Pocus. Oh, she did think like the Queen and Snow White was really scary. And she went through a period, which she still might be going through, where she doesn't want to watch any movies with bad guys, which is
Mm.
all movies. So now she's basically just watching Minecraft videos on YouTube. Oh, she said she likes Frozen 2 better than Frozen 1 because it doesn't have bad guys. Um
Okay.
The So this next one, I called it a movie that changed things for you. And so I will tell you how I define this. This is like
Well,
when I think,
why don't you go first this time on this one? That
okay,
way you
when
can
I think of this,
say how
it's
you
the
define it and then
movie.
give us your examples.
Okay. Um, when I think of this, I think of when people talk about seeing Star Wars for the first time. And they're like, oh, that completely changed things for me. That changed the way storytelling was, or it changed the way I watched movies or things like that. So that's the way like I define this. So mine are
Okay.
from Disney, acquired property. Well, actually, it was released under Disney. It wasn't released on Pixar. Mine actually is Toy Story for this one because I remember watching that in the theater and I had that feeling this this is changing everything. Like I didn't really know it was called 3D animation, 2D animation at that point. Like, but I just remember thinking, we're not going to see as much of what we have seen, like with Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast,
Sadly,
all
that
of
turned out to
those.
be true.
And like this is brand new. And I remember from the very first time that they show like the cloud on Andy's room and it pans down and you see all of the like cardboard gel and all of that stuff, just thinking this is like things are very different from now on. The non-Disney movie is Jurassic Park for the same reason, because I remember seeing those dinosaurs and at that age, I knew they weren't real, but I'm like, how in the world did they do that? Like, is that a real, is that a real like robot or dinosaur, whatever that they brought to life? How did they do that in the movies? And still, when I watch it today, that's a really, really fun, really, really cool movie, really, really cool moment. And actually, that's that's a movie I tried to show my kids, and it did scare one of my kids because the especially the at the end with the velociraptors, they're jump scares. So Rachel, why don't you go ahead and go next? Movie that changed things for you.
I think both of these are from when I was a little bit older. The Disney movie is uh, probably Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one.
How'd that change things?
I
Like,
just like
just out of curiosity.
the way that it made me think about storytelling, the things that it made me feel interested in. It just really stuck with me. I just became really super obsessed with it. I like it was the movie that made me want to like go see other movies and like I saw the sequels, like I got dressed up, I went to midnight showings. I had never like really done anything like that before. I don't think I had been quite as like interested in movies before Pirates of the Caribbean. It was just so cool. It just felt like a really cool movie, and I it made me feel uh, like especially being like the age I was, like on like kind of the cusp of adulthood, of young adulthood. It just felt like the coolest movie I'd ever seen in my life. And I think the first one still holds up. The sequel's not so much. And then a non-Disney movie, also when I think I was in middle school, I saw it. It had been out for a while, but I didn't see it till I was middle school. And the movie is Interview with the Vampire. Um, and that, like, if you know anything about my writing now, about my like reading interests, like that
And
was
your interest in vampires.
yeah. And and it also was one of the first like really adult-ish movies I saw like, and I was a really, really squeamish kid. So until I was about that age, I avoided movies with like a lot of violence. And I remember being really nervous when my friend said like, "Hey, let's have a sleepover and watch this movie." Um, because I think I had like started reading the book, but I was hesitant to watch a movie because I like was scared to see like blood on the screen and violence, and I was scared of like how it would make me feel. Um, and I remember just like I immediately went out and bought the DVD and just watched it over and over and over again. Like Tom Cruise's performance is incredible. Kirsten Dunst, uh, they could have probably cast somebody else in Brad Pitt's role, but the other two are just absolutely amazing in it. And so it kind of propelled a lot of my personality and a lot of my interests to where I am today.
Okay. All right. How about you, Ryan?
Well, I think it's funny that you were talking about vampires, Rachel, because I also am a big vampire fanatic, but not from any kind of movie. It's just like played a lot of Castlevania and watched a lot of Buffy, and that stuck with me. And I'm very sad that What We Do in Shadows is now over, and I think that was
Yeah.
a mistake. But I'm not going to air my grievances right now. Um, so the Disney movie that instantly came to mind for me for a couple different reasons was The Lion King. Uh, and I'm very obsessed with The Lion King because just the first movie, like everything outside of that is very questionable. I mean, it's a beautiful film, but like it did two things. For me personally, it helped me sort of set me on a path towards this like sort of universal spirituality that I've adapted over the years and like the circle of life. And I think that is like just something that really stuck out with me from that movie at that time. And God, it's like I'm getting all excited just thinking about The Lion King. It's a great movie. But really what changed for me, and I think for filmmaking for children's movies, is like that's not like the Kuna Matata stuff is like and maybe Simba Nala doing like I just can't wait to be king or like the most quirky fun parts of the movie. The rest of that movie is so dark. It is a very dark children's film. It was a movie that actively killed a character on screen relentlessly. It was like, like in all the other Disney movies, you'd see somebody like fall off somewhere, you don't know what happens. In most kids cartoons, this is a movie that like actually showed like, yeah, people die, like, and like what happens when somebody dies, and like what's like this, you see this character wildly traumatized on screen, and it really did change things after that because like I mean, this is like a famous movie that people reference now, including like
Hmm.
people that did not grow up with The Lion King. And like The Lion King made it so like, kids' movies and like movies like that children could were like for a very long time. Think about the 80s, right? And like even all the cartoons we watched, they were just like He-Man, which had like a whole world and universe that was like, oh, interesting. It was so goofy because they were so afraid to do something. And that movie really pushed it to the limits. And like it showed that kids could have that level of depth of understanding, and it's told in a beautiful way where like yeah, Mufasa is murdered literally on screen, but also there's like a whole spiritual component and like what the circle of life is, and there's like I think it just teaches a lot about how the world and the universe works, and that also like it really did change things, and you did make it so like a family film could be a lot more darker than just like on the surface level of like good guy kills bad guy, the end. Like that's, I mean, you know what I mean? Like the motivations are very like base surface level, whereas Lion King was very, very complicated, and Scar was a complicated character, and he was very much right for what he wanted to do, not for killing Mufasa, but like, you know, what he was trying to change. And then he didn't do any of it well because he ended up just becoming a dictator, and that didn't work out. But I think it made kids like myself think, and I think it ended up changing how the scope of even Disney films worked after that. And because like it wasn't too long after that we got Lilo and Stitch, right, which was just like just a movie about trauma, straight up. um, but yeah, like that's my Disney answer. And then I sort of have two for the non-Disney. I'm trying not to get too long on it. One is The Matrix, which I think even when it came out, like it was such a phenomenon. And like I dressed up like Rachel did to go see those movies after I saw the first one because it really sort of pushed the limits of what CG could do and sort of entered what we are now in and have been for like 25 years of this growing sort of cyber era. Like leaving like 2000 happened and we like truly went into a world that is completely online. Um, and the Matrix was like, this is a terrifying thing that might happen. Here we are, we're doing it. And there's been, I say this a lot, but since Matrix, I mean, here and there might be like a good movie that I'm like, oh, it's good. But has there ever been anything in filmmaking the past 25 years that has been at the level of what the Matrix did? And there hasn't. And like, we keep on trying to recreate that because like it just I think even everything everywhere all at once, which is a great movie, it's still doing the freaking Matrix. It's like there's still that whole component happening in there where there's like you're putting on this piece to go into a cyber world. It really is interesting how it ended up shaping what the future was. But on a personal level, the other answer I had was Rocky Horror Picture Show because as a queer person growing up, there's barely any media. There's still barely any films that are like that were like about queerness, and it's a very complicated subject because I think there are people who think that it's a bad representation of the trans community, which it is. But I think we shouldn't write off like what it did do for so many people like myself, where I'm like, this is a space where like being queer at all, any in any capacity, is something that I can relate to and like feel okay with. Um, and it is still I mean, there's been some other movies like Bros came out, which was a terrible film, by the way. Uh, like it made it so like you could it gave us something to relate to, and TV has handled this a lot better. And we're not here to talk about TV, but like when Legend of Korra finally like ended and they had like a female couple be at the end of it, that's when TV changed and started having like queerness all over it. Where I still am yet to see that happen in the movie world, but Rocky Horror is definitely what I would reference on a personal level for that. So sorry for the
Okay.
long-winded answer. I had more to talk about Lion King than anything else, but I had to bring that up.
But the next one is, and Rachel, you can go first on this one. The movie or movies that make you cry or are sentimental. So they don't have to be sad, but when you watch it, you either get sentimental, you shed a tear for whatever reason.
Um, it doesn't take a lot to make me cry.
Is it,
I'd say
can I take a guess?
okay.
Is it Little Princess?
Well, okay. So I mentioned a little princess in our chat, but the truth is like I didn't just like go they had to take me out of the theater. I had like I
Yeah.
had like recurring dreams as a kid that
It's a
my
terrifying
parents
movie, right? Like
yeah, even before I saw this movie, I had like recurring dreams that my parents would just randomly decide to abandon me. There's nothing to support this like fear. It was completely irrational and out of nowhere. So like that movie was horrible for me. Like I couldn't breathe. I was crying and so freaked out
Yeah,
at the
right.
thought of like her basically just being abandoned and alone. And then when she finds her father, he doesn't remember her. Like, oh, so awful. Um, I'd say like a movie that like Lilo and Stitch all pretty much always makes me cry. And then like movies like Hercules, like certain moments in movies, like
hmm
especially like during like very strong musical numbers. Lilo and Stitch isn't a musical, but like that one, like at the end when he when Stitch have to go. Um, and like Hercules, like to go the distance always makes me cry. Um, So it's that's a hard question for me to answer because literally pretty much any movie can make me cry at the right moment.
Okay. Ryan, go ahead.
Um, Disney, Toy Story 3 is a movie that I have not watched once since I saw it the first time because I was a wreck for the last 25 minutes of that film. Uh, Maybe low key traumatized by it. uh, Toy Story 3, yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I don't feel like I need to explain to anybody what happens, but it's like one thing after another. And then it's like, are they all gonna die? No, they're being saved by the claw, and I'm sitting there sobbing, and then like Andy giving the toys away and
Hmm.
giving Woody away after we had this like, I don't know, 20-year journey with this series was this again, this is like it's like TV shows where you have enough time to actually um get to know the characters and who they are, so if there's multiple movies in a like in a, well, now it's no longer a trilogy and they're making Toy Story 5 for whatever reason, but yeah, that messed me up pretty good.
Okay.
um that's pretty much the only answer for that because I like I said I don't really cry over movies, um but Toy Story 3 did it, and it's earned its place as that title. I was gonna say, well, all right. Well, I was gonna mention something about what to do next, but Cody, what's yours?
So I actually Toy Story 3 could be on there. I for Disney I have, and they're not necessary. I don't know. I don't cry every time, but they're very sentimental to me. The more recent movies Onward and Cars 3, because of the s- the relate in Cars 3 that was out when my oldest son was, I think, 2 at the time. So like we watched that a lot. Onward, the story of like the two brothers search for their father. That also came out at the beginning. Like that was the last movie we saw in the theaters before the shutdown.
Yep.
And so that came out early on Disney Plus. We watched a whole lot. And then more recently, Encanto. I during the song, and I actually Dos Arigatos is one of the my favorite
Oh yeah,
songs.
Kanto, yeah.
I cried during that song because to me, like that's kind of, and I know the three of us have talked about it. I've talked about it many times with people what like Encanto represents, but the first time watching that and even the second time watching that, to me it was like, oh, this whole movie I thought she was the bad person, like she couldn't let her family do what they wanted to do. Here's why, and here's like everything that she went through, and so it was this really sad slash beautiful moment. The non-Disney movie is actually I had to go way back to the Never Ending Story. And that was not like sentimental. That is like sad. That
Yeah.
if you've ever watched that and if people haven't watched that, I don't I don't know. Like I can't I even go and watch it today and that particular scene, and I can't remember what it was something of sadness like with the horse. Um
Oh yeah,
that scene
that's a
still,
sad scene. I
yeah,
agree.
that scene still gets me. That I'm like, it almost to the point that I just don't want to watch the movie, even though like I absolutely love the movie. And now a message from Cody's Inner Dialogue. Hey Cody. Yeah, what's going on, Inner Dialogue? Valentine's Day is coming up. Yeah, yeah, I know that. And you know what makes great gift for Valentine's Day? Well, I think people usually do like candy and flowers and sometimes like stuffed animals and everything. Yeah, 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 whatever. Uh, Being a fan of Disney, the book makes a perfect gift for Valentine's Day. Oh, yeah, thanks. Thanks. That's a good idea. Yeah, it's got tons of information in there about the parks and about your love of the parks and about Disney and other people's love of Disney. Yeah, yeah, it does. And it talks about Valentine's there. No, no, actually, I gotta correct you. I don't write about Valentine's in the book. You don't? No. Have you read it? Of course I've read it. Then you would know that Valentine's isn't included in the book. Do you want to sell these books? Yes, yes, I do. Being a fan of Disney the book, available on Amazon, and it makes a great gift for any occasion, especially Valentine's. Okay, especially Valentine's. Um, Thanks, Inner Dialogue. Back to our show, everyone.
Oh,
Inspirational movie and moment.
yeah, sure. So the ins okay, so I did put down for Disney the most inspirational movies I wrote was both Lilo and Stitch and Moana. Lilo and Stitch because it's about found family. So like I don't need to. I feel like if your listeners have watched or listened to any of these classes, you know that I love Lilo and Stitch, and I think it's a great story about building your family and overcoming trauma together. But I think Moana for Disney is truly like an inspirational movie because it's about a character who goes against what everyone is telling her to do to do the right thing that will help everyone, and that she's unafraid and she's willing to go take that journey and sacrifice herself to do that. And that alone is an inspirational movie to me. The most inspirational moment in a Disney film is also that for me, which is literally I like even when I hear the music happen, I love that moment when she's walking through the water that's parted towards like Tafiti, who's like in demon mode, because Moana has figured out that all of this is caused because that demon is in fact Tafiti. And she's walking toward her, holding like the heart in her hand, being like, remember who you are, because I know who you are. That is just like so powerful. That is some powerful storytelling. I love that so much. We haven't done Moana, have we, Rachel? I don't think
I
we
don't
have.
think so.
I
No.
think we've talked about it, but I don't think
Yeah.
we've actually done it yet.
Mm-mm.
Um, and just sort of like Moana being so confident in herself and what she can do and helping somebody else remember who they are and who they are as themselves is like a really powerful moment for me. And that's my Disney answer. My
Okay.
non-Disney answer, there's two things here. So like the inspirational movie that I always go to, I don't know if either of you have seen this, but have either of you seen Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter is Dead?
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
It's a hilarious film. The premise is that like this family's mom leaves for a couple months, like for an entire summer, and the babysitter they hired like dies on like day one from a heart attack, and it's a totally goofy movie. But what ends not the goofy movie, but like what ends up happening is that that teenage daughter then is like has to they're like, oh, what do we do? Should we call mom? Should we get another babysitter? And it's funny because it's totally unrealistic because they're like they just drop off like the dead body of the babysitter at the morgue and it says like woman died from natural causes. Like that's what they leave as a note. And what this girl ends up having to do is that she has to go out in the real world and get a job. And she's just been like this teenager that just wants to date boys and like, you know, like wants to live. And that process of her having to realize how to operate as an adult in the real world versus like your entire life in your childhood and coming into that is really crazy. And she makes a lot of mistakes and then at the end really pulls it together, and the mom comes back and she's angry, but then she realizes that like the daughter had really like
Hmm.
pulled the family together, got the other family members who were like kind of like fallouts and or you know they dropped out in school, like got them on the board, like got them on track. And she's like, where did all this nice equipment, the stereo equipment came from? And so like, I earned money and I bought it for the family. And it was like just like, and like when the mom comes back and she's like, we need to have a serious talk and shit, and the daughter's like, no, they had been arguing before she left, and she's like, no, wait. The daughter's like, I understand that you're angry, let's sit down, let's talk about it as adults. And the mom being like, what happened to you? Like you're like a human being now. You're not a child anymore. I think it tells a very important lesson of like going from like childhood into the real world. And that's why I always use it as like a point of reference for even beyond this chat, because I've had this conversation before. I'm like this movie actually tells a really like truthful lesson about what it's like to stop being a kid and enter the workforce, and like how stressful the real world is, and having to how quickly you have to like adjust, otherwise you're going to sink or swim. um I think it's a great movie for that. And then like I did a non-Disney inspirational moment that was like separate from that, and that was Batman Returns when Selena Kyle finally just has had it with being like abused by her boss and just like snaps and is like, that's it. And she just has this total meltdown and becomes Catwoman. And then she's like, now it's time to destroy all the CEOs who are horrible, along with anybody else who's just kind of a horrible person. And I love that too a little bit because I'm like, you go, girl, you know? And then it has some really good music by Danny Elfman there too. So anyway, those are my answers. I pass the baton to anybody else who wants to go next.
Okay.
Um,
Rachel, go ahead.
yeah, so like an inspiring Disney movie it would probably be Hercules. I think like
Go the
that
distance.
yeah, like just the idea. And like honestly, like I think you could name other Disney movies that have stronger messages. Like the like kind of the message of Hercules is you're not awkward, you're a Nepo baby. Like that's like the underlying message to it. But the way that it's presented where, he feels awkward and strange and like he doesn't belong, and it turns out like he has this whole family. And I think like just the filmmaking or the animation techniques really kind of tug at your heartstrings a little bit. I'm not like a big like sweeping epic like inspirational movie person. Like I don't like those like big inspirational sports movies and stuff like that. But I think Hercules does a good job of capturing that kind of inspiring tone. But you could make the argument that all these like family Disney movies have very like inspiring moments. And for my non-Disney movie, I'm gonna cheat because my other fandom besides Disney is Star Trek. And Star Trek is like just an inspiring franchise in general, but it's mostly TV shows. But like movies
There's some
like
movies, some
yeah,
famous
but they
movies in
have
there.
movies
Some have
that
space whales, some have like Spock
yeah,
and Kirk in a really
and I
romantic
think
setting.
like yeah, and I think the first one, the motion picture, it has like it's so underrated and it's very slow, but it has like all of these great messages about like humanity and like religion and it's and then like the most recent movie, the Star Trek Beyond, also has like um very inspiring messages about like um hope and like the worth of humanity and
Was that
us
sort of the remake of
aspiring to do
the
better.
first one? I can't remember. There were a lot of
Not
new Star
really.
Trek
It took a
movies.
lot of inspiration from like other Star Trek like properties.
Okay.
But it's definitely not a remake, but it has a very, I guess like it has a very different, it has some elements that are the same, but it's I'm not going to go off on a tangent about it, but and then for a moment, like I couldn't even name like a particular moment from either of those movies that I found like super extra inspiring, but I think a moment in a movie that I would say the movie itself is not like super inspiring to me, but the movie isn't, but the moment is, which is that's in Jurassic Park where Ellie sees the dinosaurs for the first time, and she's like so
Mm.
distracted by this leaf because because that's like plants are like her expertise, so she's just looking at this leaf because it's from a plant that's been extinct for millions of years. So when Grant turns her to look at the Brachiosaurus, like the look on her face, what I love about it is how it's like so multi-layered when you think about like not just like the plot of the story, but also like the context of the like moment in time when the movie was made and how CGI was just not a thing, and it was not usual to see dinosaurs. Like they would have been miniatures or claymation, and they just would not have looked it just wouldn't have worked as well for that particular shot. So they had to use computers, and it looked so real, and it still does because they knew what they were doing. Uh, and so yeah,
Kind of sad because the new Jurassic Park
yeah.
movies look
So
worse
I
than the
mean,
original one did, but the
but I
technology
think
should
like
be
just that
better.
particular moment is so cool to me because it works on like both
Yeah.
a in text and a metatextual layer.
Well, and what's so interesting is that like what that scene you're describing, that's the scene where that's the reason I said Jurassic Park was the movie that changed things for me. Is when she
Hmm.
first looks
Oh,
up and she
okay.
sees the giant dinosaurs walking. That
Yeah,
was the time that was like, whoa, this is,
yeah.
this and actually Ryan, that's another it's that movie was also another example of my kind of realization, like further realization of product placement. because
Jurassic
that
Park.
movie was used to introduce the Ford Explorer. And
Yeah, I forgot about that.
I wanted a Ford Explorer that looked like that. I never understood why they didn't sell Ford Explorers painted like that. Like that
Yeah,
was the car I wanted. Like when I was going, because I was probably, I don't know, 5 years maybe somewhere around there from starting to drive, and I was like, when I get a car, that's what I want. I want it to look like that. Uh, so my
many people
inspirational
as adults have
movie or
done that.
moment. Well, sorry, Ryan.
I was saying many people that are our age have gone and done that at this point. Then they've just got
Yeah.
it. They've gotten the shop to just do it for them.
Yeah. Um, so interestingly, when I think about inspirational movies, I do a lot of times think about like those sports movies. Because like I grew up
I
playing
knew that was going to
sports.
be your answer too. So
Um,
I was interested which ones it was going to be. So
well, but what's so overall like a Disney inspirational movie to me is one you two have probably have not seen, most people haven't seen. It's called Eddie the Eagle.
the
Um,
Eagle, no, I don't think so. But I'm going to
it
Google it.
Mm-mm.
it's actually it's Taron Egerton was in it. Hugh Jackman's in it, but it's about it was the first English ski jumper. So like the people who
2016 is
like
when the
go
movie
off
came
and
out.
like do the really long ski jump. It was the first one in like 50 years or something. And it's this really fun movie because it all obviously takes place like in England and
Christopher
in
Walken's in it.
Switzerland. Yeah, Christopher Walken's in it. Like, but at the end, it is inspirational because of like how it ends. But I really like that movie, and it could even be like a comfort watch for me. Like I watched that one because it reminds me of when I lived in Colorado and just everything like being, snow being everywhere, mountains being everywhere. But it also is inspirational, like the way that it ends. The whole movie isn't, but it has inspirational um, kind of message in it. For for the moment, I don't really have like a non-Disney movie. I have two, um, well, for moments, and one of them is a Disney movie, one of them's non-Disney. An inspirational moment from a Disney movie is the locker room speech in Miracle, about the 1980 men's.
That's the one you did a parody of, right, for your class.
Yes, and I like doing that in class. Yeah, I did a parody of that for the class. And I'll even from time to time I'll even do it like with the boys when we're getting ready for games or things like that. But most recently, the most inspiring moment I've seen really comes from a recent movie, Wicked Part One, which I think maybe
Very
now they're
recent.
just calling Wicked. I think maybe they've dropped the Part One since they're,
I think they're just calling it Wicked.
yeah, since they're calling the second one Wicked for Good. I think they dropped Part One, but and specifically the defying gravity scene. Like I knew that was going to be a huge scene and a huge moment, but in the theater when when she uh when she soars up and she, especially when she says the part about the no wizard that there is or was is ever going to bring me down, like that's the part that last probably minute and a half of that song on screen is just phenomenal. um so let's
How was the audience? Were they also cheering? Like,
well, what was so okay, so what's so cool, we went to see that the first time on Thanksgiving Day. And you heard people like talk about how some people were upset that the movie was being ruined because people were singing. Um,
yeah,
so the first time we saw it, it was before the sing-along version was released, and no one was singing in our theater. But the we went to see it again with my family on Christmas Day, and that was the day that the sing-along. That was the first day the sing-along was released, the sing-along version. And so like it has the words and everything up on the screen. And so we went to see that, and that was so cool because there were probably 20 people, 25 people in the theater. But a lot of
yeah.
them were like a lot of them were singing along. We My family lives outside of Austin, Texas, and so where we went, it looked like just the age of kids. It looked like there were a lot of high school kids in there. And they were singing along. And so it also was really cool to me because I was like, hey, this is a really cool experience. Like they get away on Christmas Day. This is a place where like they have obviously like been looking forward to this, wanting to sing this, and like the people next to me, like two or three seats down, they were like they were really, really into it. It was really, really it was cool. So not the first time, but yeah, the second time people were really involved in singing, clapping, things like that. Let's end on the movie you most relate to so we can kind of mix it up for next time. So
I guess we'll
this
need
is the
more
movie you
questions.
most relate to for whatever reason. Go ahead, Ryan.
Whoo! So Disney surprising no one, Lilo and Stitch. To be, I don't know, I got Stitch merch everywhere in my house. I love Stitch. It's not, if you want to buy me a gift at any point in time, like people just know they could default on like X-Men or Stitch and they'll probably make me happy. Um, the reason why I say for Disney being Lilo and Stitch, and Rachel and I did do sort of like a deep dive on this on our podcast, is that like this that movie again, it's about found family, it's about being different, and like there's just like a such a heavy queer metaphor to that, especially for a character like Stitch, who's an alien, he's not from that planet, and trying to fit in and be different with this other little girl who does not fit in with anyone really. Like it's just like all these characters who don't fit in anywhere. um really like spoke to me. The first time I saw it in theaters, like I was like a teenager, and I was with my friend, and we were like just kind of like distracted the whole time. But when I came back to it as an adult, I just kind of got really obsessed with it for that reason, and just sort of understanding that there's so much trauma behind it, and like what it's like to be sort of like not accepted by the people you're surrounded, and so you just have to sort of build this family with all these other weirdos, is something that speaks to me not only as a queer person but also as a neurodivergent person. And like I would say, like I would honestly say that I think all my friends that I'm close to like are people that I do consider like also like family to me, and like the people that I get along with are like people that are also like in that category of either queer or not neurotypical or both. And sort of like we all have this understanding that like we have each other, and that's a big piece of what the roller skating community is like, and why I even roller skate in the first place is because there's so many of us that just don't fit in anywhere, and like but we fit in well with each other. um and to sort of find that place is it's a tough journey, and that's why I've always liked Lilo and Stitch. It's because like I get Stitch's deal, I really get Lilo's deal. Like what a sad character Lilo is. Rachel and I talked about this, we were watching the movie and we're like we're getting traumatized by Lilo's trauma right now. Like it was like it's crazy, and it's so funny because that movie's also very dark, and they kind of like try and offset with like Pleakley being Pleakley in the background. um but yeah, and it's speaking of queerness, I mean like that's that. And so it's a very emotional movie for me, and like I have started to sort of tear up over it just because like I've created that connection to it for me personally. But like that is my go-to for Disney. My non-Disney one is not it's way goofier. I don't know how Rachel's gonna even feel about me saying this because I don't even know how she feels about this franchise, but it's a Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Okay.
um I love that movie. It is something that really was designated for our generation of kids that had graduated in the late 90s, early 2000s, and like that life that we had directly after that, and what it was like influenced by gaming, and like just sort of like how much time I spent in arcades and like and at shows like underground grunge shows, and like how nerdy the people I hung out with were, and like just like that whole scene. And whenever I watch Scott Pilgrim in the World, I'm like, I can relate every single character in this movie to somebody I know in my life. I'm the Wallace Wells to my friend who's a Scott Pilgrim, right? And like it's just like that whole movie is like a whole era that is like that 2003 to '06 era that like really captures it perfectly. And I'm like, no, this is exactly what it was like leaving high school and like getting like just not really taking the real world seriously and not really understanding it either. When you're like your biggest problems are like, what show are you going to go to? What game are you playing? Who's dating who? And like all the drama around that. And it's like it just always takes me back and like and and also another very queer property. It's not as explicitly queer in the movie, but the books and the TV show are very 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 queer. Um, yeah, it's I don't know. Like it's like I think maybe I don't know. Rachel, was that at all part of your experience? Because you're slightly younger than me, so I don't know if you got to experience the world in that lens. But like it's a very short period of time for a very specific generation of people. So you know, um, that's my most relatable one is Scott Pilgrim. I freaking love that. I just watched it again
Okay.
a week ago.
Scott Pilgrim, I did see. I remember I saw it. I saw it. I was like an adult by the time it came out, and I remember seeing it in the theaters. And looking back on it now, I'm thinking like that's basically Hot Topic the movie, huh?
Yeah, it really is.
It's very charming in a way. I can see kind of like flaws like over like 15 years out from it, but
Yeah,
it's very unique. But it's funny because one of my movies is a an Edgar Wright movie too.
Edgar
Um,
Wright just nails it though.
Edgar Wright is
He's always
great.
crushing it. Like, find me a bad Edgar Wright movie.
Yeah. So my Disney relatable movie is a preview of our next episode 11 of Love is an Open Door, which is Muppet Treasure Island. Like I don't like think that's like it's I mean it's a very well done movie. But I like and I'm like texting Ryan about it while I watch it. Like this is a perfect movie. Every line is perfect. Like I think it is a perfect movie. I don't think it's a super inspiring movie. I think it's got like inspiring moments, but that's just not its purpose. But in terms of relatability, um, I especially I'm a person, and this is kind of like pointing out my flaws, but I tend to, especially since I became a mom, so this is something I'm like always trying to work on, which is like I'm not always like the most patient person in the room. And like I relate really hard to Tim Curry's character in that movie of being like like I have this thing that I'm trying to do that I'm trying to focus on and it's like everyone else around me is like just acting like a maniac and what's going on here and I like fully admit like this that's my own like issue to work out but I find Tim Curry so relatable in that movie of like oh my God. And like also not just like in my personal life, but looking at like the broader like world around me and like how and I'm sure like you guys can understand this too of like being like, what is happening to people now? What is going on?
Yeah.
Um, and so my non-Disney movie in that vein that I relate to, which is less family friendly, I thought like, okay, I'll pick one that's more family friendly, but my true one, which is not really like a family friendly movie, is Hot Fuzz.
I was wondering
Um,
if it was going to be Hot Fuzz.
yeah,
I was like, it's
because
either going to be Hot Fuzz or it's going to be Shaun of the Dead, and I don't know which one it's going to be.
well, it's gonna
No.
be Hot Fuzz because I almost said Simon Cowell, but Simon Pegg's character in that is like just walking into the situation that he does that he's like I don't want to be here, and I'm not talking about like my like personal life mostly like I love my friends, I love like listening to them and being around them, and then my more which is my favorite Christmas movie, one of my favorite
Well,
movies of
that's
all
funny you should bring
time.
that up because I was going to be like, I'm like, should
um
we add like what our favorite Christmas movies are? But then I was like, that might just be a whole separate podcast to be like
no
Disney
and
and like Christmas, you know?
yeah. But just like I love Ralphie and I love how he's like it really captures the feeling of being a kid and not feeling like anybody like is listening to you.
Yeah.
And which is like there's other movies that like take that theme a little more seriously. Like but A Christmas Story like is so simple. Like he just wants his BB gun and nobody cares that he wants a BB gun. And like as far as he's concerned, like he is like the lowest rung on the totem pole of life, and his desires are not like actually like do not actually matter to anybody. And like I'm over analyzing this movie. It's just a series of funny skits about Christmas. Vague, some more vaguely related to the holiday than others, but I relate to Ralphie so much, like his growing frustration with like, why won't anybody listen to me? And everyone just keeps telling him like, no, you don't really want that thing. So
Yeah.
those are my most relatable movies, which probably reveal more about my character, less charitable things about my character than I would normally want to admit.
I don't know. I mean, I feel you with like that because like if I think about Christmas Vacation, which is my Christmas go to, it's like that's what I remember like what Christmas was for many, many years was like suddenly half the family is coming and living with you for like 6 days and how freaking chaotic that is.
Yeah.
And
See
I was
also
I went
Home
I it's
Alone or the
yeah, I
beginning of
have to
Home
watch it
Alone.
every season because I'm like,
Yeah.
this is like it's not what it's like anymore. Like as now that I'm 40 and like a lot of that has stopped, but like growing up, I was like, no, this is like truly what it is, and we're all having a good time, but we're actually all arguing and losing our minds. I always tell
Hmm.
people, I'm like,
Yeah.
this is the most realistic Christmas movie out there. So
Yeah.
I feel yeah.
So there's a, do you know the trivia point? There's a connection between Home Alone and Christmas Vacation. Do you know what it is?
Home Alone and Christmas Vacation. Isn't
Who directed Home Alone?
Chris Columbus.
Yeah. So Chris Columbus first was working on A Christmas Vacation or Christmas Vacation.
is it like a connection? It's not the house; it's a different house, right?
No,
Oh, it's yeah,
it's the
definitely a
connection
different house.
with Chevy Chase. You know, Chevy Chase is very famous for not being easy to work with at times.
Oh,
Um,
so he quit the
After a few
movie.
weeks, Christopher Columbus left Christmas Vacation, and then the movie he made after instead of that was Home
Oh, it's
Alone.
Home Alone.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, that's
So
I did
fun.
not know that. That's interesting though.
so we actually have Chevy Chase to thank for two of the most iconic Christmas movies, I guess. Thank him for his difficulty to work with sometimes.
You know, it's very good. Cody, where do
So
you land on this?
so real quick, my Disney movie, I could say Mary Poppins or Mary Poppins Returns, because specifically I say Mary Poppins Returns because when it came out, I had read so much about how like the company of everyone at Disney was so happy when Mary Poppins was made, and I liked that movie, Saving Mr. Banks, and so I remember feeling so happy that like there was a new Mary Poppins movie coming out in my lifetime. Like I remember going and seeing that, and I went to see it a couple times because I enjoyed it. It made me emotional and I guess I relate to it because uh, just where I was when I saw that movie, like having younger kids, being able to share that, enjoying the first movie, being scared of the first movie in some ways, and then this one like being able to find that was really one of the first movies that I could that wasn't just like all out animated or cartoon that I could show the kids and say, look, this is like a movie that I really enjoyed growing up. This is a new like a sequel to this movie. So here's
Right.
something we can enjoy together. The non-Disney movie is also it is not appropriate for families. But it's a baseball movie called Bull Durham. And if you've ever watched any baseball movie, a big critique of it is always there's always the big game at the end where the favorite team wins and like the hero of the movie hits a home run or just makes a sacrifice or something like to like win. This movie doesn't do that. This movie is it's about a minor league baseball team. There actually is a team called the Durham Bulls in Durham, North Carolina. It's based on like basically players in minor league baseball who are just trying to some of them make it to the majors, some of them kind of working their way down and trying to play another day. But what's so fun about it is like when I watched it as a kid, I didn't, there's a lot of like sexual messages in it that I didn't really understand as a kid. But what I
Yeah.
understood was the baseball references, and they do a lot of the director's actually a former minor league baseball player. So they do a lot of inner dialogue and mound visits and things like that. Like they have cameras to watch the catcher and the pitcher talking and things like that. And when I would play, like those were very real interactions. And so I aside from talking about some of the things they talk about in the movie, but when you would go, like I played catcher, when you would go and you would talk to the pitcher, like you're not talking baseball all the time. Sometimes you are joking around or you're talking about things that to get people like relaxed or things like that. And so I really, really related to that for that reason, that it was just it's this really, really fun movie. It's also my favorite sports movie. So that's that's the non-Disney movie. So at this point, we've gone through six. We will finish off the six after this.
Mhm.
And we will put that out as a part two for everybody to listen to. So Rachel, Ryan, thanks for
Mhm.
joining.
Thank
And
you.
then yes, the next time we are back together, uh, you both will have 5-time virtual, Ryan, not real
Woo!
jackets, 5-timers jackets to being a fan of Disney the
I took
podcast.
it so
Woo!
literally when he said that. I was like, "Where are you getting them from? What kind of fabric? What material?" It's like, okay, Ryan, calm down. He was like, "No, no, no, virtual ones." I'm like, "Okay, but if we go over here, we can actually get real." It was a very Ryan Pagella answer.
No worries. You, both of you, thanks. Have a great
You're
rest of the
welcome.
day.
Yeah, you
Thank
Bye.
too. Thank
you.
you, Cody.
Thank you, Cody. Bye.